The room was empty. Meadow Sinclair stood in the doorway of the prayer chamber, her hands folded in the prescribed manner, her head covered with the white cotton scarf that marked her as a wife of the prophet. The November cold seeped through the wooden walls of the compound, settling into her bones like an old familiar ache. She had been kneeling here for 6 hours. Her knees were numb, her back screamed, but she did not move. This was obedience. This was submission. This was the life she had chosen at 18 when choice was a word that meant nothing at all. Through the single window, she could see the compound spreading out below. Covenant Springs, 300 souls living behind chain-link fences and the word of God as interpreted by one man. Wooden buildings clustered together like frightened animals. The temple in the center, white and severe. The school where children learned mathematics and scripture in equal measure. The communal kitchen where 7 women prepared meals for a household of 33 people. The gardens now frozen and skeletal under the first real snow of the season. And beyond the fence, the wilderness. The Bitterroot Mountains stretched toward a sky the color of old bruises. Meadow had lived here for 10 years, and in all that time she had never been beyond those fences without permission, without supervision, without the reminder that she was property sanctified and sealed, but property nonetheless. She pressed her hand to her stomach, still flat, still secret, 8 weeks along, maybe 9. She had delivered enough babies to recognize the signs in her own body, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure, the nausea that struck without warning, the tenderness in breasts that had never known the weight of milk. A child, Prophet Thane Blackwood's child. Her first after 10 years of barren waiting, while her sister wives produced baby after baby, each one another jewel song in Thane's crown of righteousness. She should have been happy. This was blessing. This was purpose. This was the entire reason she existed within these walls. But all Meadow felt was terror. The door opened behind her. She did not turn. Footsteps measured and deliberate crossed the wooden floor. The scent of sage and cedar the oil's Temperance wore to mark her status as first wife. "You may stand." Temperance Blackwood's voice carried the authority of 15 years as the prophet's primary companion. She was 35, 10 years older than Meadow, with the kind of beauty that came from absolute certainty. Pale skin, pale hair, pale eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. Meadow rose. Her legs trembled. She locked her knees and kept her gaze downcast, staring at the floorboards that someone had scrubbed to white perfection. "The council has considered your transgression." Temperance circled her slowly the way a hawk circles prey, speaking against the elders, questioning their authority, spreading discord among the women. "I only wanted to help," Meadow said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Sister Jubilee's daughter, she had bruises." Silence. The word cracked like a whip. Meadow's mouth closed. "You are not a doctor. You are not a judge. You are a midwife, and even that privilege hangs by a thread." Temperance stopped in front of her close enough that Meadow could see the individual stitches in her perfectly tailored dress. "Do you know what happens to women who sow discord?" "Meadow, do you know what happened to the last wife who questioned the order of things?" Meadow did know. Sister Charity had been sent away 3 years ago, reassigned to a compound in Arizona. Her children had stayed here. She had left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the understanding that some questions had no answers, only consequences. "I understand," Meadow whispered. "Do you?" Temperance's hand shot out, gripping Meadow's chin, forcing her head up. Their eyes met. "I don't think you do. I think you still believe there's a world out there that wants you. That would welcome a woman with no education, no family, no skills beyond catching babies and knowing which weeds to boil for tea." The grip tightened. Meadow tasted blood where her teeth cut into the inside of her cheek. "There is no world for you beyond these fences, Meadow. There is only this, only us, only the family you were blessed to join." Temperance released her, stepping back. "You will remain in isolation for one more day. Tomorrow you will apologize to the council. You will ask their forgiveness, and you will never ever speak of things you do not understand again." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Meadow, I know about the baby." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Congratulations. The prophet will be pleased." Temperance's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "We'll announce it at Sunday gathering. Another blessing for the family, another soul to raise in righteousness." The door closed. The lock turned. Meadow stood alone in the prayer chamber, her hand pressed to her stomach, and felt the walls close in. 3 months earlier, life had been different. Not good, never good, but different. Meadow had woken at 4 in the morning, as she did every morning, in the bed she shared with no one. The prophet had 7 wives, 7 beds, 7 rooms, a rotation carefully managed by Temperance to ensure fairness and maximize fertility. Thursdays were Meadow's night. Every other night she slept alone. She dressed in the dark. Long skirt, long sleeves, hair braided and pinned. The mirror on the wall showed her a stranger. 28 years old, but she looked both younger and older. The roundness of youth still in her cheeks, but the eyes were ancient, weary, belonging to someone who had stopped asking questions because the answers never changed. The house was already stirring. Sister Honor, wife number 5, was in the kitchen, starting breakfast. Sister Mercy was upstairs with the babies changing diapers and singing soft hymns. Sister Patience was at morning prayers in the private chapel, her voice a low murmur through the walls. Meadow took her basket and slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn darkness. This was her favorite time. The hour when she was alone, when the compound was still sleeping, when she could breathe without someone watching, measuring, judging. The herb garden was her kingdom. A plot of land 30 feet square, tucked behind the communal kitchen, surrounded by a low fence she had built herself from salvaged wood. Here grew the plants her father had taught her to recognize before he died, before she became property of the compound. Yarrow for bleeding, chamomile for nerves, raspberry leaf for pregnancy, valerian for sleep, echinacea for immunity. Each plant cataloged in her mind, each use memorized, each preparation a ritual she could perform in complete darkness. Her father had been a wilderness guide before he found God, or God found him, or whatever the prophet claimed when he absorbed broken families into his fold. Samuel Thorne had taught his daughter to survive when civilization was a memory navigation shelter fire foraging. He had taught her these things in secret during the brief years between joining the compound and dying of cancer, as if he knew she might need them someday. As if he understood that knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be taken away. "You're up early." Meadow spun around. Sister Honor stood at the garden gate, a shawl wrapped around her thin shoulders. She was 24, married to the prophet for 2 years, and pregnant with her first child. 6 months along, belly round under her modest dress. "Couldn't sleep," Meadow said. She bent back to her task cutting sprigs of peppermint. "How are you feeling?" "Heavy, tired, blessed." The prescribed answers delivered in the prescribed order. Honor stepped into the garden, lowering herself onto the wooden bench with a small grunt. "The baby's kicking constantly now. I think it's a boy." "Could be." Meadow kept her voice neutral. Sex determination was God's business, not theirs. "Are you eating enough iron? I can make you a nettle tea." "I'm fine, us." Honor's hand rested on her belly, protective. Then quieter. "Meadow, can I ask you something?" The tone made Meadow pause. She set down her scissors and turned. Honor's face was pale in the growing dawn. "When you deliver babies, do you ever see things that concern you?" The question hung between them, dangerous as a loaded gun. "What kind of things?" Meadow asked carefully. "Bruises, marks, on the young ones." Honor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Sister Jubilee's daughter, Faith. She's 13. I saw her in the bathhouse last week. There were bruises on her thighs, finger marks on her arms." Meadow's hand stilled. She had seen those same bruises, had noticed them during a routine check when Faith complained of stomach pains, had documented them in the private journal she kept hidden between the pages of her herbal reference book. "Marriage is sacred," Meadow said. The official answer, the safe answer. "She's 13. Honor's eyes were bright with tears. "And Elder Matthias is 57. The prophet arranges all marriages according to God's will. Does God's will include bruises? Does it include a child who flinches when men speak to her?" Meadow knelt beside the bench, taking Honor's hands. They were cold, trembling. "Sister, you must not speak like this. If Temperance hears—" "I don't care what Temperance hears." The tears spilled over now, tracking down Honor's cheeks. "I'm going to have a baby, maybe a daughter. And I keep thinking, what if someday she's 13 and some elder decides God wills her to marry him? What if I have to dress her in white and watch her face when she realizes what marriage means?" The words were sedition, apostasy, the kind of thinking that got women reassigned, separated from their children, erased from the compound's memory. But they were also true. Meadow squeezed Honor's hands. "I'll look into it," she heard herself say. Quietly, "I'll document what I see. And if there's evidence of harm, I'll bring it to the prophet." Honor's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "Someone has to." It was the wrong answer, the dangerous answer, the answer that would change everything. But Meadow had delivered 73 babies in her 10 years as the compound's midwife. She had seen those children grow, had watched the girls reach puberty and disappear into marriages arranged by men who called it holy, had delivered babies from mothers who were still children themselves. And she had kept silent because silence was survival, because questioning was suicide, because one woman's voice meant nothing against the word of God. But she had her own child now, growing inside her, a daughter maybe, who would someday be 13. A key turned in a lock she hadn't known existed. The prophet's studies smelled of leather and old paper. Books lined the walls floor to ceiling, their spines uniform and severe. Doctrine and scripture. History as written by men who believed God spoke directly to them. Nothing frivolous, nothing questioning, nothing that suggested the world might be larger or stranger or more beautiful than the walls of Covenant Springs. Thane Blackwood sat behind his desk reading a letter by lamplight. He was 45, handsome in the way of men who had never questioned their own authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes the color of winter ice. He wore the simple clothes of the compound, hand-sewn and modest, but they fit him like a uniform, like armor. Meadow had been married to him for 10 years, had shared his bed one night a week for 10 years, had memorized the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his skin, the careful, dutiful way he performed his marital responsibilities. She respected him, feared him, obeyed him. That was enough. That had always been enough, until now. You asked to see me. Thane set down his letter, giving her his full attention. His gaze was steady, evaluating. Temperance said you had concerns. Meadow stood before his desk, hands folded, head uncovered, as was permitted in private audience with her husband. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her mind, had chosen each word carefully. I've been documenting some medical concerns, she began. In my role as midwife, patterns I've noticed among the younger girls. What kind of patterns? Injuries consistent with marital difficulties, bruising, tearing, emotional distress. She kept her voice clinical, professional. I believe some of the marriages may be causing harm. Thane's expression didn't change. You're speaking of physical intimacy between husbands and wives. I'm speaking of children, girls as young as 13 who are showing signs of trauma. Trauma. He repeated the word as if tasting it. That's a word from the outside world, Meadow. We don't use such language here. What language would you prefer? Abuse, rape? The silence that followed was absolute. Meadow's heart hammered against her ribs. She had gone too far, pushed too hard, broken the fundamental rule a wife does not challenge the prophet. Thane stood slowly. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from her. Close enough to intimidate, far enough to maintain propriety. I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully. His voice was soft, reasonable, more frightening than shouting would have been. The marriages performed in this compound are ordained by God, approved by the Council of Elders, sealed by priesthood authority that predates your birth by generations. Who are you, a midwife with no formal education, no priesthood authority, no divine calling to question these arrangements? I'm not questioning the authority. I'm questioning the age. The same age girls have married for thousands of years. The same age Mary was when she bore the Savior. The same age your own mother was when she married your father. He paused. Or have you forgotten where you came from? She hadn't forgotten. Her father had been 42. Her mother had been 15. The marriage had been legal in the compound if nowhere else. Her mother had died giving birth to Meadow's stillborn brother when Meadow was 7. She remembered the blood, the screaming, the way her father had buried himself in scripture afterward, as if God's word could fill the hole her mother's death had left. I remember, Meadow said quietly. That's why I'm here. Thane studied her for a long moment. Then he returned to his desk, settling into his chair with the air of a man accustomed to being obeyed. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. He knew. Of course he knew. Temperance would have told him immediately. Yes. How far along? 8 weeks. And you're experiencing the emotional volatility common to early pregnancy. The hormonal changes, the irrational anxieties. He spoke as if reading from a medical textbook. This is natural, Meadow. Expected. It will pass. This isn't hormones. This is documentation. Evidence. I have records, which you will destroy. The command was absolute. Tonight, every page, every note, whatever journal or diary or record you've been keeping in secret, you will burn it. Do you understand? Meadow's hands clenched at her sides. And the girls are exactly where God wills them to be, as are you. Thane opened another letter, his attention already moving past her. You may go. I'll see you Thursday night. We'll pray together for the health of the child. It was dismissal. Clean, efficient, final. Meadow walked to the door. Her hand on the knob, she paused. What if it's a daughter? She asked. Our child. What if I give you a daughter? Thane looked up, surprised by the question. Then we'll raise her in righteousness. Teach her obedience. And when the time comes, arrange a marriage worthy of her bloodline. What age? That depends on many factors. Maturity, readiness, the will of God. 1314, his eyes narrowed. If that is what God wills, yes. Meadow nodded slowly. She opened the door, stepped into the hallway, closed it behind her with a soft click. She did not go to her room. She went to the chapel, the small private space where women prayed when the weight of righteousness became too heavy to carry alone. She knelt on the wooden floor, folded her hands, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, she prayed to a God she wasn't sure existed anymore. If you're real, show me a way out. If you're good, protect my daughter. If you're there at all, give me the strength to save her from this place. The chapel was silent. No voice from heaven, no burning bush, no angels descending with answers written in fire. Just silence and the cold and the knowledge that if God wasn't listening, she would have to save herself. The Sunday gathering was the compound's heartbeat. Every soul in Covenant Springs assembled in the temple for 3 hours of worship, testimony, and the prophet's weekly sermon. 300 people packed into wooden pews, dressed in their finest modest clothes, voices raised in hymns that shook the rafters. Meadow sat in the wives section, 5th row, 4th seat. The hierarchy was rigid. Temperance in front, then wives 2 through 7 in order of marriage. Behind them, the unmarried women. Behind them, the children. Men on the left, women on the right, as God intended. The prophet stood at the pulpit, his voice carrying to the back of the hall, without microphone or amplification. He was a powerful speaker, charismatic in the way of men who believed every word they said. When Thane Blackwood spoke, people listened. When he commanded, they obeyed. Today's sermon was about purity, about maintaining separation from the corruption of the outside world, about the sacred duty of families to raise children in righteousness untainted by the filth of modern society. Meadow listened with half her attention. The other half was cataloging, counting, observing. 17 girls between the ages of 12 and 15 sitting in the children's section. Of those 17, 9 were already married or betrothed. 8 still waited for the prophet to receive revelation about their eternal companions. She knew each girl by name, had delivered most of them, had watched them grow from infants to children to young women whose childhood ended the day they put on a white dress and were sealed to men old enough to be their grandfathers. Faith Ashworth, 13, married 6 months to Elder Matthias. She sat very still, eyes downcast, hands folded in her lap, a perfect picture of obedience. But Meadow could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she flinched when Matthias leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Charity Morrison, 14, betrothed to Elder Silas. The wedding would happen next month. Charity had been in Meadow's herb garden 2 weeks ago, asking about plants that could prevent pregnancy. Meadow had pretended not to understand the question, had offered raspberry leaf tea for menstrual cramps instead, had watched Charity's face fall with the understanding that there was no escape, no prevention, no way to control what would happen to her body after the wedding. Grace Whitmore, 12, not yet assigned, but her father was on the Council of Elders. Her bloodline was pure. It was only a matter of time. Meadow's hand drifted to her stomach. Still flat, still secret, though not for much longer. Temperance had said they would announce it today. As if summoned by the thought, Thane's voice shifted, taking on the warm, pleased tone he used for good news. Before we close, I have a blessing to share with the family. He smiled, and 300 faces smiled back. Sister Meadow, my 4th wife, has been blessed with child. After 10 years of faithful service, God has seen fit to open her womb. Applause rippled through the congregation. Warm, genuine, pleased. A baby was always a blessing, always a celebration, another soul for God's kingdom. Meadow stood when Temperance gestured. She walked to the front of the temple, keeping her eyes down. Her hands folded, her expression appropriately, humble and grateful. Thane placed his hand on her head. We ask God's blessing upon this child, that it may be healthy and strong, that it may be raised in righteousness, that it may grow to serve the family and honor the priesthood. Amen, the congregation echoed. Meadow returned to her seat. The service continued. Hymns were sung, testimonies were shared. The closing prayer was offered. And then as people filed out into the cold November afternoon, she felt the walls closing in. They would watch her now, monitor her health, her diet, her activities. Temperance would assign someone to accompany her everywhere to ensure she didn't overwork herself, didn't take risks, didn't do anything that might endanger the precious cargo she carried. She would lose even the small freedoms she had. The early morning hours in the garden. The walks to gather herbs in the forest just beyond the fence. The moments of solitude that made life bearable. The cage was getting smaller, and the child inside her was the lock. That night, Meadow sat on her bed with her journal open on her lap. It wasn't really a journal. It was an herbal reference book, thick and well-worn with botanical drawings and notes about medicinal properties. But between the printed pages, she had inserted her own sheets of paper. Observations, dates, names, documentation of every concerning thing she had witnessed in her role as midwife. Faith Ashworth, bruising consistent with forceful restraint, complained of pain during examination. Age at marriage 13 years, 2 months. Charity Morrison requested information about pregnancy prevention. Exhibited signs of severe anxiety. Age at betrothal 14 years, 7 months. Hope Jensen delivered at age 15 years, 1 month. First child, labor complicated by underdeveloped pelvis. Mother and child survived, but both required extensive medical intervention. Page after page, girl after girl. A decade of silence documented in careful handwriting that no one was supposed to see. Thane had ordered her to burn it, to destroy the evidence, to erase the record of what was happening inside these walls. She should obey. Obedience was safety. Obedience was survival. But her hand wouldn't move toward the fireplace. Instead, she found herself reading, remembering. Each name was a face, each date was a story, each entry was a life that mattered even if no one else thought so. A knock at the door. Meadow closed the journal quickly, sliding it under her pillow. "Come in." Sister Honor entered, moving slowly, one hand supporting her pregnant belly. She closed the door behind her and stood there uncertain. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "If Temperance finds out." "What is it?" Honor crossed to the bed, lowering herself with a grunt. "I've been thinking about what you said, about looking into things, about documentation." She paused. "Did you speak to the prophet?" "I did. And Balang, he told me to destroy my records. Told me the marriages are God's will, and I have no authority to question them." Honor's face fell. "So that's it. We just accept it." Meadow looked at her, really looked at her. This young woman, barely more than a girl herself, pregnant and trapped, and starting to ask the questions that had no safe answers. "Can I ask you something?" Meadow said quietly. "If you could leave, if you could take your baby and walk out that gate and never come back, would you, the question hung in the air between them, dangerous, treasonous, the kind of question that got women reassigned or worse. Honor's hand moved to her belly, protective and unconscious. "I don't know where I'd go." "That's not what I asked." A long silence. Then so quietly, Meadow almost didn't hear it. "Yes. God help me, yes." Meadow nodded slowly. She reached under her pillow, pulling out the journal. "Then I'm not burning this. I'm keeping it. And when the time comes when there's someone who might listen, might care, might actually do something, I'm going to make sure they see it." "That's apostasy." "I know. They'll excommunicate you. Take your baby. You'll lose everything." "I already have nothing. The only thing I own is the truth." Meadow opened the journal, showing Honor the pages of documentation. "And I'm done pretending it doesn't matter." Honor stared at the pages, at the names and dates and careful observations, at the evidence of a decade of silence. "What can I do?" she asked finally. "Watch, listen, document anything you see. And when I leave," the words slipped out before Meadow could stop it. "When you leave," Honor's eyes widened, "you're planning to escape." Meadow hadn't been, not consciously, not until she heard the words come out of her own mouth. But now spoken aloud, the idea took shape, became real, became possible. "I have a child coming," she said slowly. "A daughter, maybe. And I will not raise her in a place where 13-year-olds marry 50-year-old men, where questions are apostasy and documentation is treason, where God's will always means shut up and obey. You'll never make it. The fence is watched, the gate is locked, and even if you got out, where would you go? You have no money, no identification, no. My father taught me to survive in the wilderness. I know these mountains. I can walk to the highway. It's 90 miles, 3 weeks maybe if I'm careful. You'll be pregnant in winter. I know. You could die out there. I could die in here." Meadow met Honor's eyes. "At least out there I'd die free." The truth of it settled between them. Honor's hand rested on her own pregnant belly, her expression torn between horror and hope. "I can't go with you," she said finally. "I'm too far along. I'd never make it. I'm not asking you to come. I'm asking you to remember. When they ask where I went, when they search, when they try to find me, I'm asking you to forget this conversation, to protect yourself and your baby." Honor nodded slowly. Then she leaned forward, pulling Meadow into a fierce hug. May God go with you, she whispered. The real God, not the one they preach about in the temple. She smoothed her dress and walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. Meadow, when you get out, when you're safe, tell someone. Tell everyone. Make them hear what happens in places like this. I will. The door closed. Meadow sat alone with her journal, her hand on her belly, and made a decision that would change everything. She would not wait for permission. She would not ask for mercy. She would not hope that men who called abuse holy would suddenly see reason. She would walk out, through the fence, through the wilderness, through whatever it took, and she would take the truth with her. The cage door was locked, but Meadow Sinclair had just decided to break the bars. The fence was easier than Meadow expected. She had been studying it for 6 weeks. Every morning during her herb garden rounds, every afternoon walking to the communal kitchen, every evening stroll that temperance permitted for the baby's health. 6 weeks of memorizing patrol patterns, guard rotations, weak points in the chain-link perimeter that surrounded Covenant Springs like a promise and a threat. The compound had 3 guards who rotated in 8-hour shifts. They were young men, early 20s, dedicated but inexperienced. They walked the fence line with rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes scanning outward for threats from the world beyond. They never looked inward. Why would they? No one had tried to escape in 15 years. Until now. Meadow waited until 2 in the morning, the coldest, darkest hour when even the dedicated grew sluggish. She had been awake for 22 hours straight, fighting exhaustion with sheer will. She wore 3 layers under her long dress, thermal underwear stolen from the communal laundry, a sweater, a second dress, her warmest shawl wrapped around her shoulders. On her feet, boots she had waterproofed with beeswax over the past month. The backpack had been the hardest to assemble, every item stolen slowly, carefully over 6 weeks. A tarp from the maintenance shed, matches from the kitchen, a water bottle refilled and hidden, jerky made from the compound's meat stores, dried fruit from the pantry, granola bars she'd been hoarding from her own rations, a knife from her herb kit, 50 feet of rope, a compass her father had given her before he died, hidden in her herb book for 10 years, $600 in cash taken $5 and $10 at a time from the household funds she managed, enough she hoped to buy a bus ticket once she reached civilization, and the journal, the evidence, the documentation that would either save lives or get her killed. She moved through the dark house like a ghost, past the room where Temperance slept alone in her first wife's privilege, past the nursery where 11 children under the age of 5 slept in rows of cribs, past Thane's chamber where her husband dreamed whatever dreams prophets dreamed. She did not say goodbye. Goodbyes were for people who expected to be remembered kindly. Goodbyes were for people who might return. Meadow was never coming back. The night air hit her like a fist. November in Montana, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees. Her breath formed clouds. Her fingers were already numb despite the gloves she wore. She crossed the compound yard, staying in shadows, moving between buildings the way her father had taught her. Heel to toe, weight distributed, silent as smoke. The fence loomed ahead. 12 feet of chain link topped with barbed wire surrounding 300 acres of compound property. She had found her exit point 3 weeks ago, a section behind the equipment barn where the fence met a rocky outcrop. The ground there dipped, creating a gap of maybe 18 inches between fence bottom and earth. 18 inches. Meadow was small, 5'3", 115 pounds before pregnancy. Now at 14 weeks, maybe 125. She could fit. She had to fit. She dropped to her stomach in the frozen dirt. The backpack caught on the fence. She wriggled backward, removed it, pushed it through first, then followed. The chain link scraped her back. She exhaled completely, making herself smaller. Pushed with her toes, pulled with her fingers. The fence caught on her dress, tearing fabric. She didn't stop, kept pushing, kept pulling. Her belly scraped rock. For one terrible moment, she was stuck, wedged between earth and metal, unable to move forward or back. Panic rose in her throat. She forced it down, breathed, adjusted her angle, pushed harder, and then she was through. Meadow lay on the other side of the fence, her dress torn, her hands bleeding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She waited for shouting, for alarms, for the sound of boots running across frozen ground. Nothing, just wind through pine trees, just the vast Montana night. Just freedom that tasted like blood and snow. She stood, shouldered her pack, turned her back on Covenant Springs, and walked into the wilderness. Behind her, 300 souls slept on, unaware that one of their number had just become something they didn't have a word for. Free. The first 5 days were the hardest. Meadow moved through Lolo National Forest like a woman possessed. 20 miles the first day, 18 the second, 15 the third when the morning sickness caught up with her, and she spent 2 hours on her knees vomiting, nothing into frozen undergrowth. She navigated by compass and memory. East, always east, away from the compound. Toward Highway 93, 90 miles as the crow flies. 120 on foot, accounting for terrain. Her father's lessons came back with the clarity of muscle memory. Follow ridgelines when possible. Avoid valleys where cold air settles. Water flows downhill. Moss grows on the north side of trees. The North Star is always constant. She rationed her food carefully. One granola bar for breakfast, jerky for lunch, dried fruit for dinner, sips of water throughout the day. She refilled her bottle from streams, hoping the cold was enough to kill any parasites, hoping her body was strong enough to handle whatever contamination she couldn't avoid. On the third night she heard them, a Teves distant but distinct. The mechanical growl of engines echoing through the forest. They were searching. Of course they were searching. The prophet did not let his possessions walk away without consequence. Meadow left the trail she'd been following, scrambled down a ravine to where a creek ran black and cold under moonlight. She waded into water that bit through her boots and stole feeling from her feet, walked upstream for half a mile, then climbed out on the opposite bank. The ATVs passed somewhere to the south. She heard voices, male, calling her name like a prayer or a curse. Meadow, sister Meadow, we're here to help you, help. The word was violence dressed in kindness. She pressed herself against the boulder and waited. 2 hours. 3. Until the voices faded and the engine sounds disappeared and she was alone again, with the wind and the cold and the absolute certainty that stopping meant death. When dawn came, she was 6 miles from where they'd been searching. On the fourth day, she ran out of food. The jerky was gone. The dried fruit was gone. The granola bars had lasted 1 day longer than planned, but now they too were gone. All she had left was water and the knowledge that her body was eating itself to feed the child growing inside her. She foraged, found rose hips on wild bushes, their red bodies frozen but still edible. Bitter and tough, but they had vitamin C. She stripped pine trees of their inner bark, chewing the white cambium layer that tasted like turpentine and hunger. She found a patch of wild onions, dug them with her knife, ate them raw. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The morning sickness was constant now. She would walk for an hour, then stop to dry heave. Walk another hour, stop again. Her body was staging a rebellion. Demanding rest, demanding food, demanding. She turned back to the cage where at least she wouldn't starve. Meadow told her body to shut up and kept walking. On the fifth night, the temperature dropped to 5 degrees. She had no tent, just a tarp which she draped over a low-hanging branch and staked with rocks. Her sleeping arrangement was a bed of pine boughs, covered with the tarp, her body wrapped in her shawl, shivering so hard her teeth rattled. She did not light a fire. Fire meant smoke. Smoke meant discovery. She had matches carefully kept dry in a plastic bag, but they were for emergencies only, for life or death. This wasn't death yet. This was just suffering. Meadow lay under her makeshift shelter and felt the child move inside her for the first time. A flutter, a whisper of motion. Proof of life that didn't care about the cold or the hunger or the very real possibility that they would both die out here. She pressed her hand to her belly. "I'm getting you out," she whispered. "I promise." The baby kicked again, weak, uncertain, but present. Meadow closed her eyes and dreamed of warmth. On the morning of the 6th day, she found the cabin. It appeared through the trees like a mirage. Small, rough. A single-room structure with a sagging roof and walls made of logs that had gone gray with age. No smoke from the chimney, no signs of recent habitation. Meadow approached carefully. Her knife was in her hand before she realized she'd drawn it. She circled the cabin twice, looking for tracks, for signs of life, for any indication that she was about to walk into something worse than what she'd left. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open with her foot staying in the threshold, ready to run. Empty, abandoned, a single room with a fireplace, a cot with a moldy mattress, a table with 2 chairs, shelves on the wall holding rusted cans of food, a kerosene lamp, a stack of newspapers dated 1987. Meadow stepped inside and closed the door. The relief was physical. 4 walls, a roof, shelter from the wind that had been her constant companion for 6 days. She checked the cans. Some had burst with age. Some were dented but intact. She found beans, soup, peaches and syrup that made her mouth water just thinking about them. The fireplace. She debated for 30 seconds. Smoke would be visible for miles, but she was so cold, so desperately bone-deep cold. And the search party had moved on. She'd heard no engines for 2 days. Meadow built a fire, small, using the driest wood she could find to minimize smoke. She heated a can of soup over the flames and ate it directly from the can, burning her tongue, not caring. It was the best meal of her life. She slept for 14 hours straight, on the moldy cot, under her tarp and shawl, in a room warm enough that she could feel her toes again. When she woke, it was dark. She had lost a full day. Panic surged. Then she felt the baby move again. Stronger this time, more insistent. The rest had been necessary. Her body had demanded it. She couldn't walk 90 miles on willpower alone. Meadow spent the 7th day in the cabin, eating, resting, tending to her blistered feet and her scraped hands and the various injuries she'd been ignoring. She inventoried her supplies, took stock, made decisions. She could stay here. This cabin could be shelter for the winter. She had food water from a nearby stream, firewood. She could survive until spring, until the baby came. And then what? Give birth alone. Hope for the best. Die in childbirth like her mother had, with no one to help and no one to care. No, she had to keep moving, had to reach Highway 93, had to find help before the pregnancy progressed too far. On the 8th day, Meadow left the cabin. She took 2 cans of beans, a wool blanket she found in a trunk, the kerosene lamp, and the knowledge that sometimes salvation was just a condemned building where someone had once lived and then abandoned for reasons she would never know. The wilderness had given her a gift. 1 week of survival became 2. The woman appeared on day 13 like an answer to a prayer Meadow hadn't prayed. Meadow was moving slowly now, rationing her energy. 20 miles in the first week had become 10, then 5. Now on day 13 she'd managed maybe 3 miles. Her body was shutting down. The morning sickness had evolved into constant nausea. She couldn't keep food down, could barely keep water down. The baby was taking everything, demanding resources her body didn't have. She could feel herself getting weaker, lighter. Her clothes hung loose despite the growing swell of her belly. She knew the signs: dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion. She was maybe 3 days from complete collapse, maybe 2. And then she saw smoke. Not compound smoke, not the mechanical precision of a hunting party. This was different, a thin curl rising from a grove of aspens about a mile north of her position. Meadow approached with the last of her caution. She had come too far to walk into danger now. She circled wide, observed from a distance. The cabin was larger than the abandoned one she'd found, better maintained. Smoke rose from a chimney that wasn't crumbling, a garden dormant for winter but clearly tended. A woodpile stacked with the precision of someone who planned to be here a while, and a woman, old, 70 at least, splitting wood with an axe, her movements efficient and practiced despite her age. Meadow watched for an hour. The woman worked alone. No one else appeared, no men, no vehicles. Just one old woman living in the wilderness like it was the most natural thing in the world. Finally, when cold and exhaustion made hiding impossible, Meadow stepped into the clearing. The woman spun. The axe came up. They stared at each other across 30 feet of frozen ground. "I'm not here to hurt you," Meadow said, her voice cracked. She realized she hadn't spoken aloud in 13 days. "You're pregnant." The woman's voice was rough, smoke and years, and half dead. "Yes." "You running from something or to something?" "From." The woman lowered the axe, studied Meadow with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. "Covenant Springs." The name was a gunshot. Meadow's knees buckled. She caught herself against a tree. "How did you—" "I know that look." The woman set down her axe. "I was born there. Married at 15, escaped at 32 with my baby girl." A pause faded. "Lost her to pneumonia 3 months later." The words hung in the cold air. A history compressed into 3 sentences, a lifetime of grief carried in the lines of an old woman's face. "My name's Verity Carter," the woman said. "And you look like you need a hot meal and a real bed." "I got both." Meadow took a step forward, then another. Then her legs gave out completely, and she was falling, and the last thing she felt was hands catching her, and a voice saying, "I got you, honey. You're safe now." Verity's cabin was what the abandoned one had tried to be. Warm, solid, a home. Meadow woke on a real bed with clean sheets. A fire crackled in the hearth. The smell of soup filled the air. For a moment she thought she'd died, and this was whatever came after. Then her stomach cramped with hunger, and she knew she was still very much alive. "Easy." Verity appeared with a bowl of broth. Sip slow. Your stomach needs to remember how to work. Meadow sat up. The room spun. She gripped the bowl and drank. The broth was rich with fat and herbs. She tasted venison onions, something green she couldn't identify. How long was I out? Day and a half. You were in bad shape. Dehydrated. Malnourished. That baby's taking everything you got, and you got nothing left to give. Verity settled into a rocking chair. How far along? 16 weeks. And how far did you walk? 13 days, maybe 70 miles. Verity's eyebrows rose. Pregnant in November. Through the bitter roots. Girl, you're either the bravest or the stupidest woman I ever met. Maybe both. A laugh, dry as desert wind. I like you. What's your name? Meadow Sinclair. Sinclair. Verity's expression shifted. Samuel Thorne's daughter. The name was a ghost. Meadow's hand tightened on the bowl. You knew my father. Knew of him? Wilderness guide before he got religion. Smart man. Heard he died maybe 10 years back. She paused. So you're married to the prophet. Fourth wife. How do you know that? I keep tabs. Got friends who left. We have a network. Pass information. Help people who run. Verity leaned forward. You're not the first to escape Meadow. Won't be the last. But you might be the first to make it this far this fast while pregnant. Meadow set down the empty bowl. They're looking for me. Course they are. Prophet doesn't like losing property. The word was acid. But they won't find you here. I'm 50 miles from their usual search radius, and I know how to hide. Why do you help? Verity was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft with old pain. Because 38 years ago I was you. Pregnant, running, terrified. And nobody helped me. Nobody. I had my baby in a cave, cut the cord with a rock, and she died 3 months later from an infection I couldn't treat. She stood, walked to the window, stared out at the forest. Her name was Grace. She'd be 37 now if she'd lived. Might have kids of her own. Might have been happy. Verity turned back. I can't save Grace, but I can save you, and that baby you're carrying. Meadow felt tears on her cheeks. She hadn't cried since leaving. Hadn't let herself feel anything but the need to survive. Now in this warm cabin with this woman who understood the dam, broke. I don't even know if it's worth it, she whispered. Running. I have no money, no ID, no way to prove who I am or where I'm from. Even if I make it to a town, what then? Then you tell the truth. Verity crossed to her, took her hands. You tell someone in authority what happens in that compound. The child marriages, the abuse, all of it. They won't believe me. Maybe not. But you document it anyway. You make noise. You become a problem they can't ignore. Her grip tightened. You know why I live out here, alone for 40 years? Meadow shook her head. Because I was too scared to tell. I escaped, but I stayed silent. Didn't want to make waves, didn't want them to find me. And because I stayed silent, that compound kept going. Kept abusing. Kept destroying lives. Tears now in the old woman's eyes. Don't make my mistake, Meadow. Don't let fear make you complicit. Meadow thought of her journal, the documentation, the names and dates. I have evidence, records I kept as their midwife. Then use them, but first you survive. Verity stood. You'll stay here 5 days. I'll feed you. Get your strength back. Teach you what you need to know. Then you finish the journey. 5 days, that puts me at 18 days total. Highway 93 is 20 miles from here. You can make that in 2 days if you're healthy. And I'm going to make sure you're healthy. For the first time since escaping, Meadow felt something that might have been hope. 5 days with Verity Carter were an education. The old woman taught her things the compound had never permitted. How to purify water using charcoal and sand. How to build a debris shelter that would hold body heat. Which plants were edible even in winter. How to set snares for rabbits. How to navigate using the sun and shadows when clouds covered the stars. But more than skills, Verity taught her anger. You're too polite, Verity said on the 3rd day. They were skinning a rabbit Verity had trapped. Too apologetic. You act like surviving is something you need permission for. I was taught that. I know what you were taught. Submit, obey, make yourself small so men can feel big. Verity's knife flashed. Forget all that. Out here, polite gets you killed. Anger keeps you alive. I'm not angry. Liar. Verity looked at her. You walked 13 days pregnant through a blizzard. You ate bark and drank from streams. You hid from men who wanted to drag you back to a man who owns you like furniture. And you're not angry. Meadow's hands stilled on the rabbit. She thought about Thane's face when she questioned him. about Temperance's grip on her chin, about Faith Ashworth's bruises, about Honor's fear, about the baby inside her who would have been married at 13 if Meadow hadn't run. "I'm furious," she whispered. "Good. Stay furious. Fury will carry you when hope fails." On the fourth day, Verity gave her supplies. Real supplies. A proper backpack, a sleeping bag rated to 0 degrees, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, $50 in cash, a map with Highway 93 marked in red. "I can't take this," Meadow protested. I need to know I helped one person escape. That's all I need." Verity pressed the cash into her hand. "When you get out, when you're safe, you pay it forward. Help the next woman who runs." On the fifth morning, Meadow stood at the door ready to leave. She had gained back 5 pounds. Her feet had healed. Her face had color again. Verity hugged her, hard, fierce. "You're going to make it." "How do you know?" "Because you already survived the hardest part, the part where you choose to leave." Verity pulled back. "Everything else is just walking. What if they catch me?" "They won't. You're too far ahead, too careful, and you have something they don't." "What?" "A reason to live that's bigger than their reason to catch you." Meadow shouldered her pack, stepped into the cold, looked back once at the woman who had saved her life with nothing but rabbit stew and honest words. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Survive. That's thanks enough." Meadow walked into the forest. Behind her, Verity stood in the doorway of her cabin, watching until the trees swallowed the young woman who was 18 days pregnant, 18 days free, and 20 miles from the road that would carry her to safety, or to whatever waited beyond the cage. Days 19 and 20 were a blur of motion. Meadow moved faster now, stronger. The food and rest had given her back her strength. The baby had stopped demanding quite so much, settling into a rhythm that felt sustainable rather than extractive. She followed Verity's map, through the final stretch of wilderness, down from the higher elevations, through forests that gradually thinned into scrubland. She could smell civilization now, exhaust fumes carried on the wind, the distant drone of traffic. On the morning of day 21, she heard engines, not distant traffic, close, immediate. The growl of trucks on a forest road she hadn't known existed. Meadow dove behind a fallen log, pressed herself flat, watched through the gaps in the wood as 2 pickup trucks rolled past. Compound vehicles. She recognized them, recognized the men inside. Elder Matthias driving the first truck, 2 young men in the back, scanning the forest with binoculars. They were still searching. 3 weeks later, still hunting. Meadow waited until the trucks disappeared around a bend. Then she ran. Not away, parallel. She knew where they were headed. There was only one road through this section of forest, if she could cross it before they doubled back. She burst out of the trees onto gravel. The road stretched in both directions, empty. She sprinted across. Her pack bounced. Her breath came in gasps. She could hear the trucks somewhere behind her engines changing pitch as they turned around. Meadow hit the far tree line and kept running. Branches whipped her face. Her boots caught on roots. She fell, scrambled up, kept going. Behind her, brakes squealed. Doors opened. Voices shouted. "Fresh tracks." "She's close. Fan out." Meadow ran until her lungs burned, until her legs were jelly, until she collapsed behind a boulder and pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. The men crashed through the forest. Close, so close she could hear their panting, could hear Elder Matthias calling her name like a prayer. "Meadow, Sister Meadow, we're worried about you, about the baby." The baby, always the baby, never her. She was just the vessel, the incubator, the cage for the precious child inside. "Come out. We'll take you home. You'll be forgiven. The prophet loves you, love." The word was a lie dressed in silk. Meadow stayed frozen. 16 weeks felt like 8 months. Time had become elastic in the wilderness. Meaningless. All that mattered was staying still, staying silent, staying invisible. The men searched for an hour, then 2. Their voices grew frustrated, tired. Finally, Elder Matthias called them back. "She's gone. Lost her trail. We'll report back." The truck started, drove away. Silence returned. Meadow stayed behind the boulder for another hour, making sure, making certain. Then she stood on shaking legs and continued east. 1 mile, 2, 3, and then she heard it. The beautiful, terrifying, liberating sound of traffic. Real traffic. Cars and trucks flowing on asphalt. The highway. Meadow climbed the final ridge. Looked down. Highway 93 stretched below her like a river. Vehicles moved in both directions, fast, efficient, part of a world that didn't know she existed. She descended carefully, reached the shoulder, stood there with her thumb out. The first car passed, the second, the third. A semi-truck slowed, stopped. The driver's window rolled down. A woman's face appeared, 50-something weathered kind eyes. "You okay, honey?" Meadows' voice broke. "I need help." "You running from Covenant Springs?" The question was a miracle. Meadow nodded, tears streaming. The driver smiled, sad, knowing. "My sister got out 10 years ago. Get in. I know where to take you." Meadow climbed into the truck. The door closed. The engine rumbled. The highway carried her east toward Missoula, toward safety, toward whatever came next. She looked back once. The forest stretched to the horizon. Somewhere in those trees was a compound full of people who believed God spoke through a man who called abuse sacred, who called escape apostasy, who called slavery freedom. Meadow pressed her hand to her belly, felt the baby move. "We made it," she whispered. 22 days. We made it." The truck picked up speed. The forest disappeared behind them. And Meadow Sinclair, age 28, pregnant and free, that rode toward a future she would have to build with her own two hands. Because no one was coming to save her. No one ever had. She had saved herself. And that was enough. The safe house smelled like lavender and old coffee. Meadow sat in a room with pale blue walls and windows covered by thick curtains that never opened. Outside, Missoula went about its business. Cars honked, people laughed. The world spun on, oblivious to the woman sitting inside who had walked out of one century and into another. The truck driver, her name was Ruth, and she didn't ask questions, had brought Meadow here on day 22. A two-story house on the edge of town. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Perfect. The door had opened before they knocked. A woman stood there, 40 maybe, short hair, tired eyes, a smile that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Another one from Covenant Springs?" she'd asked. Ruth had nodded. 16 weeks pregnant. Walked the whole way. The woman, her name was Sarah, director of the Mountain Haven Women's Shelter, had looked at Meadow with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "Come in. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign, like wearing someone else's clothes. That had been 4 days ago. 4 days of sleeping in a real bed, eating real food, using a bathroom with running water and a door that locked from the inside. 4 days of slowly remembering what it meant to be human instead of commodity. The doctor came on day 3. A woman. That mattered more than Meadow expected. Dr. Helena Price, 60 years old, who had been treating FLDS escapees for 20 years. She examined Meadow with gentle hands and sad eyes, took blood, did an ultrasound, measured the baby's heartbeat with a device that turned life into sound. 20 weeks, 2 days, Dr. Price said, looking at the monitor. "Girl most likely. Healthy despite everything. You're severely malnourished, anemic, dehydrated still, but you're both alive." A girl. Meadow's hand moved to her stomach. A daughter who would never marry at 13, who would never call a compound prison home, who would choose her own God, her own name, her own life. "What do I need to do?" Meadow asked. "Rest, eat, heal." Dr. Price cleaned the ultrasound gel from Meadow's belly, and then decide what comes next. What came next arrived that evening in the form of a man with a recorder and too many questions. Gideon Marsh was 42, lean and intense, with the kind of eyes that never stopped cataloging details. He'd been an investigative journalist for the Montana Standard for 15 years. Before that, he'd been a member of a fundamentalist community in Idaho. Different compound. Same cage. "I got out when I was 20, he said, sitting across from Meadow in the shelter's small meeting room. "Walked away from my family, my faith, everything I'd ever known. Spent the next decade trying to forget. Then I realized forgetting was complicity." He set a notebook on the table between them. "I've been documenting Covenant Springs for 5 years, talking to escapees, building a case. But I need more. I need someone who was on the inside recently, someone who can testify to current practices." Meadow looked at the notebook, at this man who had traded one kind of faith for another, who believed that truth could be written down and published and somehow change things. "What do you want from me?" "Everything. Names, dates, witnesses, documentation." He paused. "I heard you were the compound midwife, that you kept records." Sarah must have told him. Meadow had shown her the journal on day 2. The pages and pages of documentation, carefully preserved in plastic bags, carried 90 miles through wilderness like scripture. I have records, Meadows said slowly. But publishing them means making myself a target. You're already a target. The prophet doesn't forgive apostasy. Gideon leaned forward. But you have something he doesn't. You have the truth. And the truth properly documented and publicly shared is a weapon he can't fight. He'll say I'm lying, that I'm mentally unstable, that I fabricated everything. Probably. But when 6 other women tell the same story, when medical records support your documentation, when the pattern is undeniable lies, stop working. His voice was quiet, certain. I can't promise you'll be safe. I can't promise justice. But I can promise your silence will change nothing. And your testimony might save the next girl. Meadow thought of Faith Ashworth, of Charity Morrison, of Honor's unborn daughter who was probably born by now, of the baby growing inside her own body. What do you need me to do? Gideon's expression shifted. Relief and something harder. Gratitude. Tell me everything. For the next 14 weeks, Meadow told her story. To Gideon Marsh, who recorded every word and fact-checked every detail. To FBI agents who specialized in FLDS cases but had limited jurisdiction and unlimited frustration. To attorneys from the ACLU who took notes and made no promises. To social workers who documented her mental state and physical condition. Gideon built his case like a man constructing a cathedral from facts. And Meadow grew larger. 20 weeks became 25. 25 became 30. 30 became 34. Her daughter Aurora, she had decided to name her after the dawn that had greeted her on day 22, kicked constantly. Strong, insistent, demanding space in a body that was learning to be more than a vessel. The first article published in January. Inside Covenant Springs. Former midwife documents systematic child abuse. Gideon had written it carefully. No sensationalism, no exaggeration, just facts. Names redacted to protect victims, dates and ages, and medical complications spelled out in prose that made grown men look away. The response was immediate and divided. Half the state called for investigation, demanded action, wrote letters to legislators insisting something be done about compounds that operated outside the law. The other half called it religious persecution, defended the prophet's right to practice his faith, insisted that outsiders couldn't understand the sacred nature of plural marriage. And Covenant Springs issued a statement. Prophet Thane Blackwood appeared on local television. Calm, reasonable, dressed in simple clothes that suggested humility. He spoke with the practiced eloquence of a man who had been performing righteousness his entire life. Sister Meadow was troubled. He said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. We loved her, tried to help her, prayed for her healing. When she left, we mourned. We still mourn. These allegations are the product of a disturbed mind twisted by outside influence. He looked directly into the camera. Meadow, if you're watching this, know that we forgive you. Come home. Your family misses you. Your daughter needs her father. Meadow watched the interview from her room in the shelter. She had moved into a small apartment, by then January 32 weeks pregnant, living on donations and the small amount of money the ACLU had provided for her testimony. She watched her husband lie with the ease of long practice. Watched him perform concern while denying everything. Watched him claim ownership of a daughter he'd never met. And she felt nothing. No anger, no grief, no regret. Just the cold, clear certainty that she had been right to run. That staying would have destroyed her, that every step of those 22 days had been necessary. Sarah knocked on her door. You okay? I'm fine. That's a lie, Meadow smiled, bitter. I learned from the best. Sarah entered, settled onto the couch beside her. The FBI called. They're opening a formal investigation. It's not much, but it's something. How long will it take? Months, maybe years. Compounds like Covenant Springs have expensive lawyers. They know how to delay, how to obfuscate, how to make victims seem like liars. So nothing changes. Something already changed. Sarah gestured to the television where Thane's face still filled the screen. He's defending himself. That means you heard him. You made him visible, made him a problem. Is that enough? It's a start. Aurora was born on February 14th at 3:47 a.m., 6 weeks premature, 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Lungs underdeveloped from Meadow's malnutrition during the pregnancy. She spent the first week in the NICU tiny and fragile, connected to machines that breathed for her. Meadow sat beside the incubator and counted her daughter's fingers. 10. Counted her toes. 10. Watched her chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance and prayed to a God she wasn't sure existed. If you're real, save her. If you're good, let her live. If you're listening at all, please. Aurora's lungs strengthened. By week 2, she was breathing on her own. By week 3, she was nursing. By week 4, Meadow brought her home to the small apartment that smelled like formula and hope. And then the threat started. The first letter arrived in March. No return address, just a single page with words cut from magazines like something from a ransom note. Apostate, liar, child stealer. The second letter was more specific. You took what belongs to the prophet. We will take what belongs to you. Sarah reported it to the police. They filed a report. They made sympathetic noises. Did nothing. Technically, it's not a direct threat, the officer explained. We can't prove who sent it, can't establish intent. They're threatening my daughter. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but Meadow stopped listening. She had learned by now that institutions move slowly, that justice was a privilege the powerless rarely enjoyed, that protecting Aurora was her responsibility and hers alone. She bought a deadbolt for her door, pepper spray for her keychain, a baseball bat that lived beside her bed. She varied her routes, checked over her shoulder, slept in 2-hour increments, waking at every sound. Aurora grew. 2 months became 4. 4 became 6. She was small, still catching up from the premature birth, but healthy. Her eyes were blue like Meadow's. Her hair was dark like Thane's. She was a blend of both parents belonging fully to neither. Meadow loved her with a ferocity that surprised her. This tiny human who had survived wilderness and escape and birth 6 weeks too early. This daughter who would never know what it meant to be owned. Who would grow up free. The FBI investigation crawled forward. Interviews were conducted. Documents were reviewed. Attorneys argued about jurisdiction and religious freedom and the limits of federal authority. And Covenant Springs continued. Business as usual. Girls married, babies born. The cycle perpetuated while the world debated whether stopping it was persecution or justice. The attack came on a Tuesday in August. Meadow had just put Aurora down for her afternoon nap. 6 months old now, sleeping in a crib that Sarah had donated in a room painted pale yellow by volunteers from the shelter. Meadow was in the kitchen making tea when she heard the window break. Not the front window, the bedroom, Aurora's room. She ran. Temperance Blackwood stood beside the crib. First wife, mother of 7, guardian of the compound's righteousness. She held Aurora in her arms like a prize she'd won. Hello, Sister Meadow. Meadow's vision tunneled, red at the edges, everything slow and sharp and crystalline. Put her down. She belongs with her father, with her family. Temperance's voice was calm, reasonable. You've had your tantrum, made your accusations. Now it's time to come home. I'm not going anywhere. Meadow moved closer, slow, calculating distance. Temperance was taller, stronger. But Meadow had walked 90 miles pregnant, had survived blizzards and starvation, had broken free from a cage that had held her for 10 years. She was not the woman she had been. Then we'll take the child, raise her properly, in righteousness. Temperance shifted Aurora in her arms. The baby stirred, whimpering. She deserves better than this, better than a mother who lies and spreads discord. She deserves better than a cult that marries children. We don't use that word. Because it's true. Temperance's eyes hardened. You were always weak, Meadow, always questioning, always doubting. The prophet showed you mercy when he should have cast you out. And this is how you repay him, by stealing his child, by destroying his reputation. I destroyed nothing, I told the truth. Your truth is apostasy. Your righteousness is abuse. Temperance turned toward the broken window. She had backup. Of course she did. Meadow could hear movement outside. Footsteps. At least 2 other people. This had been planned. Coordinated. They had come to take Aurora. To punish Meadow for speaking. To remind her that leaving wasn't freedom, just a different kind of cage. Meadow looked at her daughter in Temperance's arms. At those blue eyes wide with confusion. At the tiny fists waving in the air. And her fear shattered. She had been afraid her entire life. Afraid of questioning, afraid of speaking. Afraid of choosing herself. Afraid that walking away would prove she was weak, that staying silent was survival. But fear had never protected anyone. And weakness was just a word men used to control women who threatened their power. Meadow lunged. She hit Temperance low and hard, tackling her away from the window. Aurora tumbled from her arms. Meadow caught her daughter mid-fall, rolled with the impact, came up with the baby clutched against her chest. Temperance recovered fast. She grabbed Meadow's hair, yanking her backward. Meadow kicked, connected with Temperance's knee. The first wife stumbled. The window shattered further as two young men climbed through. Covenant Springs loyalists, true believers, they moved toward Meadow with the certainty of men who had never been told no. Meadow backed toward the door. Aurora screamed in her arms. The men advanced. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," one of them said. "Just give us the baby." "Never." She ran. Out of the bedroom, down the hall. The men followed. Meadow burst into the bathroom, locked the door, set Aurora in the bathtub, the safest place surrounded by porcelain, and grabbed the only weapon available. A curling iron. Plugged in. Heating. The door splintered. Meadow pressed herself against the wall beside it. The first man came through. She swung the curling iron into his face. He screamed. The smell of burning flesh filled the small space. He fell backward into his companion. Meadow grabbed Aurora from the tub, ran for the front door. Temperance was there, blocking her exit. Blood on her mouth from the fall, fury in her eyes. "You're making this worse for yourself." "Good." Meadow fainted left. Temperance committed. Meadow spun right, kicked the first wife's legs out from under her. Temperance went down hard, and Meadow ran. Out the front door, into the street, Aurora screaming in her arms. Behind her the sounds of pursuit, voices shouting, footsteps pounding pavement. She ran toward the main road, toward traffic, toward witnesses, toward the world that Covenant Springs couldn't control. A car screeched to a stop. The driver's door opened. A woman jumped out. Sarah, from the shelter, who had been coming to check on Meadow, who had heard the commotion, who was now standing between Meadow and the three people chasing her. "Back off!" Sarah shouted. She held up her phone. "I'm calling the police. I'm recording this. Every second." Temperance stopped. The two young men stopped. They stood in the middle of the suburban street, breathing hard, calculating odds. "This isn't over," Temperance said. "Yes," Meadow said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It is." Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Someone had called the police. Maybe Sarah, maybe a neighbor. It didn't matter. Temperance and her companions melted into the shadows between houses, gone as quickly as they'd appeared. The police came, took statements, photographed the broken window, collected evidence. And when they asked if Meadow wanted to press charges, she looked at her daughter, safe, unharmed, alive, and said the words she'd been practicing her entire life. Yes. The trial took 14 months to prepare. Not criminal. The evidence wasn't sufficient for that, or the prosecutors weren't willing to risk their careers on a case that involved religious freedom and sympathetic defendants. But civil, federal. ACLU attorneys arguing that Covenant Springs violated numerous federal laws. Child welfare attorneys demanding investigation. FBI presenting evidence of systematic abuse spanning decades. And Meadow, central witness, the woman who had walked out with documentation and lived to testify. The hearing was held in Helena, U.S. District Court, summer 2024. The courtroom was packed, media in the back, survivors in the gallery. And at the defense table, Prophet Thane Blackwood and 8 members of the Council of Elders. Thane looked older. The past year had worn on him. His hair was grayer, his face lined, but his eyes were the same, certain, righteous, convinced that God was on his side. Meadow took the stand on day 3. She wore a simple dress. Sarah had helped her choose it. Professional but not expensive. Modest but not compound modest. The dress of a woman who had learned to exist between worlds. Aurora was with a babysitter, 18 months old now, walking, talking, calling Meadow mama, and knowing nothing about prophets or polygamy or the cage her mother had escaped. The prosecutor approached. A woman. That mattered. Her name was Catherine Rhodes, 45, who had built her career on cases no one else wanted. "Ms. Sinclair, can you tell the court how long you lived at Covenant Springs?" 10 years, from age 18 to 28. "And during that time, what was your role?" "I was the compound midwife. I delivered 73 babies." Catherine pulled up a document on the screen. Meadow's journal, photographed, enlarged. Impossible to deny. "Is this your handwriting?" "Yes." "And these entries, can you explain what they document?" Meadow looked at the poem, at the names and dates, at the evidence she had collected in secret, believing someday someone might care. "Those are the deliveries I attended, including the mother's age at time of birth." "Can you read entry number 17? Meadow's voice didn't shake. She had practiced this, had prepared for months. "Hope Jensen, delivered March 14, 2019. Mother's age 15 years, 1 month. Father's age 43. Labor complicated by underdeveloped pelvis. Required emergency intervention. Mother and infant survived." The courtroom was silent. Catherine continued. In entry 31, Faith Ashworth. Catherine let that number sit. 3 children giving birth to children. 3 girls whose bodies weren't ready. 3 lives started in violation and called sacred. Thank you, Miss Sinclair. Catherine returned to her table. Your witness. The defense attorney stood. His name was Marcus Webb. Expensive suit, practiced smile. He had been hired to make Meadow seem unstable, to suggest her documentation was fabricated, to paint her as a vengeful ex-wife lying for attention. Sinclair, isn't it true that you suffer from mental health issues? I was diagnosed with PTSD after leaving the compound. PTSD, a condition that can cause false memories, distorted perceptions, paranoid thinking. Objection. Catherine was on her feet. Counsel is not a psychiatrist. Sustained. Webb didn't miss a beat. Ms. Sinclair, you claim these marriages were forced. But isn't it true that in your culture, arranged marriages are considered sacred part of your religious practice? It's not my culture, it was my prison. But you participated willingly for 10 years. I participated because leaving meant losing everything, because questioning meant being cast out, because I was 18 and had nowhere else to go. Meadow leaned forward. Compliance isn't consent, Mr. Webb. Fear isn't free will. His smile tightened. You've made serious allegations against Prophet Blackwood, against the entire community. Isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta, that you're angry about your failed marriage? My marriage didn't fail. I escaped it. By stealing Prophet Blackwood's child. By saving my daughter from becoming the next child bride. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. Webb tried another angle. Ms. Sinclair, can you prove these entries in your journal are accurate? Can you verify that you didn't fabricate them after leaving? Meadow looked at him. At this man paid to defend the indefensible, to question the unquestionable, to suggest that 42 child marriages were somehow acceptable if you just use the right language. I can prove it, she said quietly, because those girls are still there, still alive, still traumatized. Interview them, examine them. Ask them if their marriages were sacred or if they were rape. She paused. But you won't, because you already know the answer. Webb had no response to that. He returned to his seat. The testimony continued. Other survivors took the stand. Women who had escaped over the years. Men who had been cast out for questioning. Each one adding their voice to a chorus that couldn't be silenced. And through it all, Thane Blackwood sat at the defense table, silent, watching. His face a mask of righteous suffering. On day 7, he finally spoke. The defense called him to testify. He took the stand with the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Dressed simply, humble, the performance of a prophet persecuted. Prophet Blackwood, Webb began, can you explain the nature of marriages in your community? They are sacred unions, arranged by revelation. God speaks to me, shows me which souls are meant to be bound together for eternity. In the age of the brides, how is that determined? By maturity, by readiness, by divine will. Thane's voice was calm, practiced. We don't follow the world's arbitrary standards. We follow God's law. And Miss Sinclair's allegations are the product of a troubled mind and a broken heart. Thane looked directly at Meadow. I loved her, still love her, pray for her daily. But she could never accept the sacred order, could never submit to righteousness. Meadow held his gaze, didn't look away, didn't flinch. When Catherine cross-examined, she was surgical. Prophet Blackwood, you claim these marriages are based on divine revelation. Can you explain why God consistently reveals that young girls should marry much older men? The ways of God are mysterious. Mysterious or convenient? Catherine pulled up another document. In the past 10 years, how many men under 30 have married women over 30 in your compound? Silence. The answer is 0, isn't it? The revelation always flows one direction. Older men, younger women, usually girls. God's will. Let me ask differently. Do you have daughters, Prophet Blackwood? I have 23 children, 11 daughters. And when your oldest daughter turns 13, will you receive revelation about her marriage? Thane's jaw tightened. If God wills it. To a man your age, 57. If that is what, yes or no, Prophet Blackwood, would you give your 13-year-old daughter to a 57-year-old man? The courtroom held its breath. Thane looked at Catherine, at the jury, at Meadow, and for the first time something cracked in his certainty. That's different, he said quietly. Why, well, because she's my daughter. And the other girls, the ones you arranged marriages for, weren't they someone's daughters? No answer. The silence was damning. Catherine let it stretch. Then no further questions. When the verdict came on a gray October morning, the court found Covenant Springs in violation of multiple federal statutes: child endangerment, fraud, operating an unlicensed educational facility, violations of labor law. The compound was ordered dissolved, assets seized, children placed in state custody pending evaluation. Adults given the option to relocate to affiliated communities or enter society. Prophet Thane Blackwood was sentenced to 25 years federal prison. 8 elders received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. Temperance Blackwood was charged with attempted kidnapping, sentenced to 8 years. The courtroom erupted, some celebrating, some weeping, some sitting in stunned silence as their world disassembled before their eyes. Meadows sat in the gallery, Sarah beside her, and felt nothing. Not joy, not relief, not vindication, just exhaustion. The kind that settled into bones and stayed. In the gallery 3 rows behind her, Meadows spotted a familiar face. Honor, now 26, holding a 3-year-old girl with dark curls. She had left Covenant Springs 6 months after Meadows' escape, walking out the same gap in the fence. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Honor nodded once. A silent thank you. Verity Carter sat 5 rows back, silver hair pinned beneath a wool cap. She had driven 12 hours from her cabin to witness this. When the verdict was read, she closed her eyes and whispered a name: Grace. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust forward. Ms. Sinclair, how does it feel? What's your message to other survivors? Do you have any words for the prophet? Meadows stopped at the courthouse steps, looked into the cameras, spoke the words she'd been composing for 2 years. If you're in a cage and you think you can't leave and you're scared of what happens if you try, I want you to know something. I walked 90 miles pregnant in November through the wilderness. I gave birth 6 weeks early to a daughter who wasn't supposed to survive. I spent 2 years building a case while people called me crazy. She paused. And I won. Not because I was brave, not because I was strong, but because I refused to stay silent. Because documentation matters. Because truth spoken aloud and repeated until someone listens is more powerful than any cage. The cameras clicked, the microphones recorded, and Meadow walked down the steps to where Aurora waited with the babysitter. 18 months old. Perfect. Free. She picked up her daughter, held her close, and walked away from the courthouse without looking back. Behind her, the prophet was led away in handcuffs. The compound that had stood for 60 years began its collapse. And somewhere in Montana, another girl who was thinking about running saw the news and made a decision. The cage was breakable, and Meadows Sinclair had just shown them all how to break it. 2 years later, Meadows stood in a small office in downtown Missoula. The sign on the door read, Mountain Haven Legal Fund, Director M. Sinclair. Aurora, now 3.5, sat at a child-sized table in the corner, carefully coloring a picture of mountains and trees. She had her mother's determination and her own fierce independence. Last week, she'd announced she wanted to be a doctor who helps people who are scared. Meadow had cried. The phone rang. Meadow answered. Mountain Haven Legal Fund, this is Meadow. A woman's voice, young, trembling. I saw you on the news 2 years ago. I'm in a compound in Arizona. I need help getting out. Meadow reached for her notepad. What's your name? Rachel. I'm 19 and I'm pregnant. Okay, Rachel, I'm going to help you. First, are you somewhere safe to talk? Over the next hour, Meadow walked Rachel through the same steps she had taken. Documentation, planning, resources. The underground network of safe houses and sympathetic truckers and women who had escaped and now spent their lives pulling others out. When the call ended, Meadow added Rachel's name to her list. 37 women helped in 2 years. 37 lives pulled from cages. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. That evening, Meadow received an email from Gideon Marsh. His book, The Breaking Point, One Woman's Fight Against an American Cult, had just hit the New York Times bestseller list. The royalties would fund the legal fund for the next 5 years. And attached to the email was a scan of a letter, handwritten, from Verity Carter. Dear Meadow, I heard about the verdict, heard about your work, heard you're saving the daughters I couldn't save. Grace would be 39 now. I think about that every day. Think about the woman she might have been if I'd been braver. If I'd told the truth instead of hiding. You did what I couldn't. You broke the silence. And because of that, 37 women are free. 37 daughters won't grow up in cages. That's Grace's legacy now. Through you. Thank you for finishing what I started. Verity Meadow folded the letter carefully. Placed it in her desk drawer next to her journal, the original worn pages that had traveled 90 miles and changed everything. Aurora tugged on her sleeve. Mama, can we go to the park? Of course, sweet girl. As they walked through Missoula's afternoon sunshine, Aurora's small hand in hers, Meadow thought about cages and breaking and the long walk to freedom. She thought about Verity in her cabin living with ghosts, but finally at peace. She thought about Honor raising her daughter in a world without prophets. She thought about Faith Ashworth and Charity Morrison and all the girls whose names filled her journal, some saved, some still trapped, all deserving of freedom. And she thought about the girl in Arizona named Rachel, who would soon walk her own 90 miles. The cage was breakable, and now the whole world knew how to break it.